Welcome to Wet Sounds. Today, we're going to show you how to transform your ride with our top-of-the-line audio kit for your Jeep Wrangler JL body. This kit is available in 2 different levels. Today, we're going to cover level 1, which consists of the front component speakers, sound bar, subwoofer with enclosure, amplifier, and level control unit with wiring. Let's dive in. Before working on your Jeep, it is recommended to disconnect the battery's negative terminal and allow the system to discharge for 10 minutes. Unclip and remove the panel located below the steering column. This will expose 2 Phillips screws that will need to be removed first. Now unclip the climate control panel and disconnect the harness. There are 2 screws fastening the display trim. Remove the screws and then remove the trim. Next, remove the screw located above the display. This screw fastens the upper dash panel to the vehicle. You can now unclip this panel and remove it from the vehicle. Eight screws will be exposed, securing the instrument panel cover and airbag cover. Remove and set aside. Unclip the steering column cover and remove from the vehicle. Remove the 2 screws located above the steering wheel column at the bottom of the instrument panel. Open the driver's side door and remove the dash side panel with a pry tool. Once the panel is removed, there will be 5 screws exposed. Remove the remaining 5 screws holding the driver's side speaker panel in place. Unclip the headlight switch harness and remove the panel from the vehicle. Next, you will need to remove 4 10mm screws and 1 8mm screw, securing the metal brace at the bottom of the dash. Remove the 3 bolts securing the speaker pod to the dash and unclip both harnesses from the pod. There is an electronic module attached to the back of this pod that will be reused for later reassembly. Repeating step 8, open the front passenger door and remove the dash side panel with a pry tool. This will expose 5 screws that need to be removed. Next, on the passenger side, unclip and remove the trim panel from the right side of the grab bar. This will expose the 2 10mm bolts fastening the grab bar. Once the grab bar is removed, you will have access to another trim panel directly behind it. Unclip this trim piece and remove the 2 screws exposed. Open the glove box and unclip the hinge. Open completely to remove it. There will be 3 screws exposed that need to be removed. From the footwell area, looking up into the glove box opening, there will be 2 13mm screws used to secure the passenger airbag. Remove these screws and gently unclip the airbag cover. Move the airbag cover forward just enough to access the 3 screws that are now exposed behind it. You can now access the next speaker pod by pulling the dashboard panel out slightly and removing the 3 bolts fastening the pod. Unclip the harness and remove from the vehicle. Next, the upper dash grille will need to be removed using a pry tool, followed by the speaker. Repeat this process for both sides. You will now need to unbolt the passenger side seat by removing the 4 Torx T45 fasteners and unclipping the wire harness. Next, you will need to remove the passenger side kick panel and door seal panel using a panel pry tool. You will need to remove the rear driver side door seal panel as well. The next panels needing to be removed would be from the overhead trim. Take the passenger side front trim panel off by removing the T25 Torx screws. An angled driver will aid in this. Unclip and set aside. You will next remove the rear passenger side panel. Take the T25 Torx screws off, unclip, and set aside. You will now be able to remove the panel that houses the dome light. To do this, you will need to use a panel pry tool to disengage the clips holding the dome light in place. Unclip the harness and set it aside. Now you can remove the T25 Torx screws located at the front of the panel. Unclip and set aside. Next, remove the passenger side B-pillar panel by removing the two 10mm bolts fastening the grab handle, followed by unclipping the panel and removing from the vehicle. We will move to the cargo area to begin the installation of the amp mount bracket. Remove the 4 hooks in the cargo farthest from the rear door area using a T40 Torx bit. These will be reinstalled later into the subwoofer enclosure. Next, move to the carpet panel behind the rear seat by unlatching the metal clips. Install the metal amp bracket into the vehicle using the supplied hardware, with the spacers below the bracket. Get all 4 bolts started, then tighten completely. You can now fasten the amp to the mount now using the hardware provided. If you are doing the LVL2 T-kit, you can install the amp at this time as well. Begin by installing the power harnesses into the amplifier. The red ferrule will be inserted into the 12-volt terminal, while the black will go into the ground terminal. Run the harness with the red terminal to the driver's side of the vehicle. There is a ground junction stud with a 10mm nut behind the sill plate cover. Remove the nut, install the ring terminal, and reinstall the nut after. Tighten to ensure a good connection. For the 12-volt side of the harness, it will run down the passenger side of the vehicle, following the factory wiring. We recommend installing the power harness inside the wire carrier, below the factory harness. You will need to run the power wire up to the front passenger seat area. Under the carpet, you will find a rubber grommet currently not in use. Once you've located the grommet, remove and use the step drill bit to pierce a hole into the grommet large enough for the wire to be snugly ran through. You can now install the harness into the grommet. Make sure the harness is inserted far enough so that the label is beyond the grommet and not seen after reinstallation of the grommet. This ensures wire is available to run to the battery. Going under the vehicle, you can route the harness along the frame towards the front of the vehicle, fastening your new harness to the factory wire harness. The power wire needs to run up the fender area towards the battery. Removing the inner fender liner will make this easier, as well as a wire runner. Prepare the fuse holder for install by fastening it to the metal bracket with a supplied M4 nut and M4 15mm bolts. Install this fuse assembly onto the fender area next to the battery. You will replace one of the fender bolts with the supplied M6 20mm Allen head hardware. The second mount will be an unused factory threaded location. You can now fasten the power wire to the distribution block terminals located towards the front of the vehicle. Next, attach the battery power harness to the distribution block location directly across from where you attached the power wire in the previous step. Connect the battery power harness with the eyelet to the positive side of the battery terminal. Use the threaded stud indicated in the picture of the Jeep install guide. We can now install the audio harness. We recommend beginning at the amplifier and working your way towards the front of the vehicle. Connect the 14-pin input connector into the SYN DX6 amplifier, followed by the 8-pin output connector. Route the harness towards the front of the vehicle on the passenger side following the power wire you ran earlier. When you reach the B pillar, you must route the 8-pin rear speaker harness up to the soundbar following the factory harness. This connector will need to be used in place of the factory soundbar harness. Simply disconnect the factory harness and connect the new audio harness to the soundbar. Continue routing the main harness forward towards the passenger side foot well. You should next reach the front right speaker connector. Route this up the kick panel area where you will connect to the passenger side front speaker harness at a later step. The rest of the main harness will route along the firewall and around to the bottom of the center console on the passenger side. Now you will need to route the 2-pin front driver side harness and the level control connectors under the dash to the driver side area. These connects will be connected at a later step. Next, you will run the RCA connectors and remote wire up the dash near the radio mounts. A wire runner will aid in routing this harness up the inside of the dash. This will connect directly to an amplifier integration interface compatible with your Jeep or any aftermarket radio. Prepare the front enclosure pods for installation into the vehicle. You will need to install the front speaker harness into each enclosure routing from the inside out. Make sure the grommet is seated properly. The 6.5 component woofer can be installed into each pod using the connector on the harness and the hardware supplied in the speaker's box. Referring to disassembly on step 12, you will need to reattach the control module removed from the original pod. Use the original hardware for this step. Note that the orientation is slightly different to optimize the enclosure space. To prepare the grills for installation, you will need to insert the tweeter into the new housing and fasten it with the M5 bolt supplied with the kit from the back. Make sure the wires are routed properly as to not become pinched in the bracket. We can now install these parts into the vehicle starting on the driver's side. Install the assembled pod into the vehicle. These will mount using the factory hardware. Connect the factory harness back into the control module and the shorter portion of the front speaker harness into the audio harness you ran under the dash earlier. For the passenger side, gently pull back the dash cover just enough to install the pod. Use the 3 factory screws to mount the pod back into position. You can now run the longer portion of this harness to the top of the dash where the tweeter will be housed. Connect the tweeter into the harness and snap the panel into position. Moving to the rear speaker installation, remove the factory grills and speakers from the rear soundbar. Remove the 4 Torx bolts mounting the ports into each side of the soundbar as well. Mount the 6x9 adapter plate to the soundbar using the hardware provided and mark where it needs to be cut. Remove the adapter plate after marking so that it does not get damaged. We recommend using a silver Sharpie. Using an oscillating cutting tool or an air saw, cut the material to make a clearance. Using an oscillating cutting tool or an air saw, cut the material to make clearance for the 6x9 speaker. Use caution as to not cut too deep as the top portion of the enclosure comes close in certain areas. Cut around any threaded inserts or plastic pieces that will prevent the plate from sitting flat. You can now permanently reinstall the adapter plate with the supplied hardware. Plug in the rear speaker harness into the factory harness on both sides of the soundbar. We will prepare the enclosure for installation by first attaching the 4 cargo hooks that you removed earlier. A hardware kit is provided with a large washer and nut for each hook. Next, connect the subwoofers to the box harness and mount using the hardware provided in the subwoofer boxes. Then, attach the grills by placing the grill in a 45-degree angle, apply downward pressure, and twist clockwise to lock. This is a great time to install the subwoofer box hinge brackets with the provided number 10 screws. That's 1.5 inch long hardware with 2 per side. You can now turn the enclosure back over and install the subwoofer rear brace M6 25mm bolts and washers into the magnet of each subwoofer. A rubber plug is provided to cover this hardware after installation. You can now place the loaded enclosure into the vehicle and fasten the rear hinges with the supplied clevis and snap rings. Now we can assemble the lift support shock in preparation for installation. Fasten the enclosure bracket into the shock using the bolts and nuts provided. Repeat this step for both sides. With the enclosure supported in the up position, screw the lift support shocks and bracket to each side of the enclosure with the supplied screws. Install the shocks to the amp bracket using the supplied nuts and bolts. Keep Allen head side facing in. Last, connect the subwoofer output harness to the enclosure, followed by the SYN DX6. From the driver's seat, remove the 4-wheel drive selector boot by gently pulling upward. Next, remove the trim panel that surrounds this selector lever with a pry tool, prying upward gently until all clips have disengaged. Remove this panel from the vehicle. Remove the rubber mat from this panel and apply the supplied cut template in its place. You can find this template in the Wet Sounds Jeep Kit Level 1 manual. This will indicate the area to be cut. Use the step drill bit to cut the material for clearance and a 1/8 inch drill bit to drill the holes for the mounting screws. Install the level control knob bracket along with the harnesses. Attach the bracket to the panel through the holes you drilled in the previous step. Now you can finish running the level control portion of the audio harness into the console and connect it to the level control knob. Reinstall the panel and make sure the harness clears the four-wheel drive selector's moving mechanism. And that's it. Your Jeep Wrangler is now outfitted with the ultimate audio experience courtesy of Wet Sounds. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this. If you're looking for more info on our Jeep kit, visit wetsounds.com or give us an email at info@wetsounds.com. And remember, the rubber ducky is not included.